And now we get to hear once again from Dr. Matt Bloom. So if you would welcome Matt back to the stage.
Thanks, Regina. The good news is that there's going to be, one of my principal admonitions for teaching was less Bloom is more. So this afternoon there'll be more opportunities for you to do some work around the table. I wanted to just talk a little bit more about this visual. Of course, it's meant to present the 5 dimensions of well-being, but it's also meant to indicate that they're all tightly interconnected. In other words, they rise and fall together. And one of the reasons this is so important is those dimensions that we might not pay much attention to, and I've already suggested that daily well-being is one, if they change, they're going to have subtle but important impacts on the others over time. I mentioned burnout earlier. Burnout's a good example because it's an accumulation of a lot of difficult days that we don't pay attention to, that then deplete our resilience to the place in which we really can't deal with even normal days very well. So it's important to think about these things as being tightly connected. But if I had to pick the 2 that were foundational, in other words, the 2 upon which the others really depend most strongly, it would be meaning, and the one we're going to talk about now, connectedness. As I think about where we are in the United States today, I think a lot about how few people really are grounded in a sense of meaning, that really know what they believe in and why, that are surrounded by a community of people that can help reinforce that understanding and encourage them to live them out. So one of the biggest concerns I have with the movement away from participation in religious communities is that people won't have a place to turn for meaning. And I think that is one of the greatest gifts and most important roles of religious communities, is to help ground people in that sense of meaning. But another really important role of religious communities is this deep sense of connectedness that's so fundamental to our well-being. Now, at the most basic level, connectedness is the quality of our relationships in life, but I wanted to talk about 2 real landmark studies that, at least for me and I hope for you, really describe how deep and profoundly important connectedness is. The quality of the relationships we have with the people that we're close to, and as you'll see, those people that are more distant from us. One of them is called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. Is sometimes called the Grant Study, that started in the 1940s with a group of then Harvard students and a matched group of Boston young men who lived in the poorest neighborhoods. It's really extraordinary. They followed these men from the middle 1940s until their death. And these men have gone every 2 years through an incredible array of tests. They have studied these men. They've measured everything from their blood pressure and their neurological functioning to the kinds of work they have done. There's been a number of books written about these men. They've tested they've tracked their nutrition. They've tracked the quality of their social relationships. They've looked at where they've lived. They have done a comprehensive review of everything they could think of that might impact the health and longevity of these men. Over 600 individual factors have been measured over time. In addition, they've interviewed spouses and children and friends and family members to get those individuals' perspective on the members in this study. The current study director, Robert Waldinger, at the 75-year anniversary was asked, what are the secrets to long life? Because these men now, those who are still alive, are in their 80s. What are the secrets to living a long and healthy life, healthy at each step in time? And what are the secrets to living a happy life, a life that feels fulfilling and good for us? And so he could look at these more than 600 different factors, and he and his team looked at them very carefully. And this is what he said. The people who were the happiest, who stayed the healthiest as they grew old, and who lived the longest, most fulfilling lives were the people who had the warmest connections with other people. In other words, out of hundreds of factors, one rose up as being the single most important: the quality of the social connections we have at each point throughout our lives. There's another study done in Massachusetts. The good people of Massachusetts are willing to do this. In Little Framingham, Massachusetts, It started about the same time as a Harvard grant study, and it's known as the Framingham Heart Study. There was a concern about cardiac health at that time, but it started really, the impulse was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's death. He died of high blood pressure, and the report is that his blood pressure the days before he died was 240 over 160. And so this study started with people in Framingham who were willing to sign up, and like the men in the Harvard grant study, every year for the beginning, and then every 2 years after that, go through another incredible battery of tests, all kinds of physiological tests, social tests. They were asked questions by psychiatrists and psychologists, and they studied, again, these people over time. This was the study that helped us link cigarette smoking and cholesterol to heart disease. The original group of 5,000, there are now spouses and children and grandchildren of the members of this study. So not only can we understand how genetics are related to health and well-being, but we can understand social factors. And it's the social factors that were most startling to me. About 30 years ago, because of all the data they gathered, they could start to study how do our social relationships impact our physical health and our well-being, our mental health and our well-being. And because these people live in the same communities, they could look at a lot of different kinds of social connections, those that we're most close to and those that are more cursory or casual for us. And there's some hard data here, so please beware that I'm very sensitive to what I'm going to talk about, but these data are incredibly, for me, impactful. They found that your chances of being depressed double if you have a depressed friend, and triple if you live close to somebody that's depressed. What this means is that if somebody that we know is depressed, we are a part of their experience. We profoundly impact their experience. Your chances of being happy, of having a good day, increase 75% if you have a happy friend. If your next door neighbor is happy, it boosts it 35%. And even somebody that lives a mile away, their happiness impacts your experience of your daily well-being. One of the ways they summarize this is they say, you may not know him personally, but your friend's husband's coworker can make you sick, and your sister's friend's boyfriend can make you healthy. One of the ways they say this is, your friends' impact your well-being. Think of that. People you don't even know are impacting your well-being, and you're impacting theirs. But the studies don't end there. Other studies have shown us, for example, a study among 600 school teachers in Australia working at over 60 different schools. They were interested in understanding burnout, which was increasingly prevalent among teachers. And they found, as we might expect, that burnout spread most rapidly among teachers working in the same school. But they found, in fact, that burnout somehow spread from teachers from one school to another one. And if you worked 2 years ago with a teacher who was burned out, your chances of being burned out today increase 40%. These social impacts last. There is a huge lasting effect. And there's even more. A study of over 680,000 people around the world during the pandemic and their social media use found that, in fact, depression, anxiety, and happiness spread through social media. Just simply seeing pictures and reading about people in your orbit can impact your well-being. Now, these data for me, and there's many, many more, were just, when I first read about them about 15 years ago, were just startling to me. I mean, I expected that the people in my family and the people that I work with, I expected that we would affect each other's well-being. I had no idea how far these social impacts matter. And I have to tell you, it gave me pause to think that somebody I worked with 2 years ago, or a student I taught 2 years ago, the way I treated them then might be impacting their well-being today. It's profound. So one of the things that bothers me is that we talk a lot about self-care. Self-care matters. I'm not suggesting that it doesn't matter, but we do not talk very much, or at least I don't hear us talking too much, about other care. Or the fact that we live, as I said earlier, in these ecosystems of well-being, where these deep interconnect connections between us and the people that we know well and the people we don't know well affect our well-being and affect theirs. We live I think, in a society that is hyper-individualistic. And so what I find with pastors is, if a pastor's well-being is low, he or she is blamed for it. Well, if you just did X, Y, or Z, if you just exercised more, or if you made sure to take time off. But I don't hear very much of saying to the local church, you know what? You impact your pastor's well-being. This is an ecosystem here. You want the pastor to care for you, which is great and important, but how do you care for the pastor? And so I think our whole language and understanding of well-being and even physical health is so individualistic that we're ignoring these powerful social factors. It's hard to say now what matters more, your self-care or the way other people care for you. And so what we think as researchers is they matter equally. And if I pause to think about that, that completely shifts the way I think about my well-being and the well-being of the people that I might come in contact with regularly and casually. When I came to Notre Dame, I'm a Protestant, I was a Methodist, and I was really concerned about being at a Catholic institution. I don't know why, and I was kind of freaked out by the whole Notre Dame. Woo-hoo, Notre Dame's an amazing place. So I was a little bit worried about would I be sucked into some sort of cultish experience, which I was, but anyway, that's a whole different story. But one of the things that I hadn't heard before I went to Notre Dame was how much they took social justice and the social gospel as really, really important. Fundamental to Catholic social thought is the whole notion of solidarity with each other, and particularly solidarity with those individuals who are pushed to the margins of society. And so I know now there are deep theological roots to this notion that our well-being is so profoundly socially embedded. So I want to offer you opportunities to think about applying the 5 dimensions of the well-being model to this ecosystems idea. And I'm going to ask you to start first with yourself. And then I'm going to give you a chance to do some work on your own at the table. And then we're going to come back together and start to imagine how we take that and apply it. Next, I'm going to use your church, or you could use your workplace. And then we'll end trying to expand even beyond that to our local communities. So I want you to think about your ecosystem, and you have in your packet and then on your table some pieces of paper that it would be really great if you just, when we take some time to work, if you took a moment to think about it. So I want you to think about your ecosystem, and this is just one way of thinking about it. Putting you in the middle, and then these rings are meant to illustrate different levels of closeness, how close a person or a group is to you. So let me give you an example. Your family, whether your family is a great and wonderful family or your family is a difficult and challenging family, we know families are very close to us in our ecosystem. They have a huge impact on us. My wife, as was mentioned earlier, is a clinical psychologist. She sees this all the time as people come into her with experiences of anxiety or depression and often don't realize how impactful their family is. So your family would likely be close in, for better or for worse. Friends, good friends would be close in. Among males in my age group, I'm 62, among males 50 and up, we suffer from a crisis of loneliness. Most men in the age group 50 and up don't have one close friend. So the absence of a close friend would be also a part of your ecosystem. We need close friends, and if you have one, so you could indicate, I have a close friend or I don't. Then you'll have to think about where your church or workplace is. How much does that impact your well-being, and how much effect do you have on the well-being of the individuals in that institution? Again, thinking back about working as a professor, my colleagues and I didn't interact a lot. We would say hello in the hallway and then we'd scuttle off and close our door. But we had a huge impact on our students, and we never talked about that. We never talked about the impact we had on student well-being, so that my students would have been close in. Then neighbors, or people that you meet on a regular basis or casually. A few years ago, I was traveling with a close friend who's a priest. First time I traveled with them, I've traveled many times with them since. And as we were going through security, he thanked every TSA officer. Thank you for keeping us safe. Thank you. And that struck me as how amazing and important that was. And he said, yeah, anybody that I interact with regularly, I want to recognize their humanity and affirm it. So you go to him with the grocery store, and he's one of these people that's constantly saying nice things to people. So those people that we come in casual contact, particularly those ones that are a regular part, would be somewhere in the ecosystem. What I think of a lot is that I may have more of an impact on them than I think they do on me, and I need to understand that it goes both ways. Your neighborhood, for better or worse, the neighborhood. I just recently, couldn't even update Bishop Regina or Barb, my wife and I just recently moved to Denver. And what I'm going to miss the community that I had out in West Virginia, because it was an amazingly close-knit community. And it was one that I didn't expect to be close-knit. The area where I bought my home, where Kim and I bought our home, was started by the gay community in Washington, D.C., so about 75% of the homes are owned by gay or lesbian couples. The community around us, as you might expect, is a very conservative, politically conservative community, and yet there was this beautiful coexistence and love and support between the two. I'd never experienced that before. So there, my neighborhood was really an important part of my well-being ecosystem. Where I live now, I'm just getting to see if I can know the neighbors. And so far, they seem to be the kind of neighbors are like, hey, how you doing? And that's it. So I'll miss the richness of a neighborhood that I can depend on. And then think about those people, again, that are not so good in your ecosystem. We got to account for those, both those ones that are close to you and those ones that may be a bit distant. I mentioned earlier that I had a kind of antagonistic relationship with my dean before I left. Being a tenured professor, sometimes you feel like you can do whatever you want. And so while the dean couldn't fire me, he could make my life more or less easy. And I felt like he was trying to make it very difficult, but it was because I was doing it with him. So we had this antagonistic relationship. And one of the things I did before I retired was to sit down and apologize to him. So think about those negative ones. And then where's social media? What is your social media connection? I am not on social media except LinkedIn. And I don't look at LinkedIn very often because I found myself in ways that I didn't want to getting wrapped up in it. I really did, and it was really hard for me. First of it was, going to my LinkedIn page and then realizing 45 minutes later I was still scrolling through things. That was a shocker. And then stepping back to think about how did I feel after that 45 minutes, and I didn't feel good. So what I want to invite you to do is to take some time now. Let me give you 10 minutes to start mapping out your well-being ecosystem. Then, as I said, we're going to come back and we're going to take the next step forward. So take some time. Can you hear the gentle gong calling you back? We're going to take just a little bit of a mental break. We'll take 10 minutes and I'll answer some questions, because in the next opportunity is for you to dig even deeper. I'll share a little bit about the well-being ecosystem of your church and give you a chance to work on that. So I have some time for questions if there are any. And if there are not any questions, you don't get out of school early. So you have to stay. You have to. Yeah, please go to the microphone. Thank you, Barb, if you have a question. Okay, I'm never that good, so somebody, thank you, sir.
Have you published any books?
Oh. Yes, there's one book, 2019 book called Flourishing in Ministry, and then I have another book that will be out next year. The first one is on what we knew about well-being at that point in time and a bit about some of the practices. And this new book will be what we've learned about well-being since then, and then a lot more about the well-being practices. I'm really interested. There's so much knowledge in the research literature, but it's locked up in these esoteric journals. I'd like to bring that to a larger group. So there is one.
What's the title of the 2019?
Flourishing in Ministry. Not that creative, but at least, yeah, that's it. Thank you. Yes, sir. Number one, I'm sorry, I sprung this on the sound crew, so.
Have you done any research on the
Have I done any research on the effects of the pandemic on well-being? I and others did do that. What we found in churches, and we're still unpacking this information, but one of the things that we found out about churches is that whatever tensions there were within the congregation or between the congregation and the pastor, the pandemic seemed to exacerbate those. So the kinds of contentiousness that was just sort of bubbling under the surface, it tended to come to the surface fully. The other thing that we saw, and this may be, I can't say for sure, but I think it might be a bit more indicative of pastors 40 and under, and those 40 and under who are newer to ministry, but their sense that there's a greater divide between how they understand ministry and Christian life and the way that their church understands what it means to be a Christian and what it means to be a church and lead Christian life. So those are at least two things. What was a bit surprising for me, but in hindsight, not so much, it was, for many pastors, it was like, oh my gosh, I can take a break now. So there was a bit of more of an opportunity for pastors to be off work or off, but then that kind of got, in some cases, taken away because now the pastor had to be suddenly a technology guru to make everything work. And so there were the pressures to be able to do, like, worship should be just as good online as it was in person. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. But I think in general, what the pandemic has done is what we're finding across the United States, across Europe, is that well-being levels still remain, they haven't bounced back to what they were pre-pandemic. They're still very low, and they don't seem to be trending upward. Yeah. I'm sorry, I sprung this on the sound crew. They didn't know I was going to do this, so. Yes, please, in the back.
Hi. I get to work with young adults in campus ministry, and when I started in that 11 years ago, depression was probably the thing that was talked about most amongst my students, and it only took a few years for anxiety to take the lead, and now there's kind of intermingled, and what I notice is my students are willing to talk about that a lot more frankly with one another, about medication and therapy, what they're learning, what they're struggling with, which I see as a strength. But I also see that they're incredibly lonely, and it's really hard for them to get connected anywhere.
Yes.
So I was wondering if there's been research, if you've done anything on that, or like young
Yes.
adults finding hope in church, or where exactly?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I haven't done research, but other people have, and it is a particular, so one of the questions that was around this, because we've seen depression and anxiety rates in this age group increasing, and one question was, are they increasing, or is it just that more people are recognizing that they have anxiety? And the answer is yes to both of them. So there are more people who realize, oh my gosh, I guess that's depression or that's anxiety, but it does seem to be increasing. And loneliness is a part of it. One of the things that, so I